We are going over the history of Mad Max 2, aka The Road Warrior, as well as its writer-director, George Miller. Australia.
Have you heard of it?
The southern land. Human habitation of the Australian continent is estimated to have begun around 60,000 years ago.
What are you doing right now?
Lacey, we're going to go through the entire history of Australia.
Just let them know the water spins the other way in the toilet and then we can move on.
The cinema of Australia began in 1906 with the story of the Kelly Gang, which at 60 minutes long, Lacey, listen, this is so important,
okay, I'm listening.
is often described as the world's first feature film. How about that? The Australian film industry has evolved in parallel to the American film industry. With many,
in parallel, you said.
Many boom and bust periods. There's also sort of like America, but even more intense was censorship, government censorship, or maybe it wasn't.
A lot of government censorship in Australia. Why does Australia seem so laid back to me?
At least when it comes to films,
why?
There was censorship.
They don't want to seem like a bunch of brutes?
I don't know.
They are a prison colony. Is that wrong?
If you're not, we have some listeners in Australia. Write to us. Tell us.
Are you a prison colony?
Lacey.
Is everybody okay?
Tell us what you think about that.
Not okay. Are they not proud of that? Is that a thing? Is it real?
I mean, if they're like, "Hey, you are slave owners, right?" What do you think about that?
I see what you're saying.
That's good.
So you guys are slave. I get it. Okay, sorry. I'm sorry.
Plus, I think that's overstated.
I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. You're the fucking history guy doing a goddamn history lesson. You don't know the basics.
Then, in the 1970s, the Australian New Wave began as censorship standards were relaxed. Suddenly, we can have violence and sex in movies. Now, this too is, in an interesting way, parallel to the movement in American films, the new Hollywood.
When is sex allowed in the movies?
1970. And you can watch this documentary on Amazon Prime, Not Quite Hollywood, which is okay. Quentin Tarantino's in it. And he talks you through, here's some awesome shit that happened in Australian movies in the 70s and 80s. And there's a lot of nudity and a lot of people being like, oh, the nudity was so fun. And then women are like, yeah, it was okay.
Wait, yeah. Australia is known for that, right? Like a lot of bush, I mean, just they went, I guess they were very reserved. And then once that got loosened, they went overboard with nudity. I suppose. And if as they saw, one movie successfully has a lot of nudity, now we'll make a lot of movies. We'll give that lady 4 boobs.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. But it also paralleled, of movement in society of sort of moving away from conservative, traditional sort of British Empire values. Okay, but still with the same kind of care as to the audience. This is a PG movie, this is a G, this is going to have some titties. Maybe your 7-year-old don't watch it. That's yes. And in fact, they had the R rating, which was, you have to be 18 to see these boobs. I'm just saying, do they have the exact same rating system as us? I don't think it's the exact same, but it's, it's roughly. So again, Australian listeners. 1 didgeridoo, 2 didgeridoo, a didgeridoo not. Unlike America, yeah, that was good. Okay. Unlike America, the Australian arts and Australian cinema has a lot of support from the government at both the national and state level. And this, great directors like Peter Weir, Gillian Armstrong, Philip Noyce, they emerged. They had huge success in both Australia and in America. And then in the 1980s, Australian movies like Mad Max and Crocodile Dundee were huge international blockbusters. So basically boom and bust periods, you have kind of a long dormancy period, let's say from, the 40s through the 70s, and then things start really cooking up again. Suddenly big artistic statements in cinema. And this movement is called the Australian New Wave of cinema. Okay. And at the same time emerges what is now known as Ozploitation. Australian exploitation concurrent with that. And again, the documentary, Not Quite Hollywood, gives a pretty good overview. And George Miller is interviewed in this, and he has this quote. He says, quote, "It's very clear now what Australian cinema was doing was basically creating a hybrid between Europe and Hollywood. And virtually all the Australian films that were funded were catching up with our history. So that was one movement that was tending to happen. There was another movement, which was genre filmmaking." End quote. So you have your highbrow, more artsy movies that are sort of engaging with Australia's place in the world and its own history of, colonialism and oppression of its Aboriginal population and environmental themes and stuff like that. And then you also have fucking cool car movies with tits and stuff. Okay. And that's, does the exploitation part come from underpaid actors?
or just like a cheap thrill, easy to make, inexpensive. They will watch this because there's nudity or because it's like raunchy.
All of that. And Quentin Tarantino, I meant to write down this quote he has in the movie where it was very good. It was something about like, they call it exploitation because you, the audience, ultimately feel exploited, that you were like promised a thing and then conned out of it, but you still had a great time.
It's clickbait.
It is clickbait. Yeah. Yes. His Grindhouse movie that he did with Robert Rodriguez is celebrating exploitation movies. And just, this was its own Australian spin on that idea. Low budget, sometimes guerrilla films, as in like, you're filming without permits.
Okay.
Horror, action, and comedy. Notable examples like Wake and Fright and The Cars That Ate Paris. And the pinnacle was probably the first Mad Max movie, which was made by this man, George Miller, who has written and directed every Mad Max film starting in 1978. George Miller was born in 1945. He was 35 years old when Mad Max 2 was produced. He was a doctor, graduated medical school along with his twin brother, then went to be a resident at a hospital in Sydney. And you pointed out when we were watching Mad Max 2 that the violence is very upsetting, like kind of in a specific way.
Lots of movies are violent. Lots of movies have SA, sexual assault or whatever in them. Not every movie handles it this way. There are two or three very, in a fun movie, it felt out of place. Or like I couldn't totally trust where this movie was going to take me or what it was going to show me. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but it is violent.
Well, I think it's intentional. And I think that he as a doctor, like, got the experience of like what human bodies are really like and how they can be destroyed. Sure. And the first Mad Max movie was very much about the damage that cars can do to people, how dangerous cars are. He's dealing with car accident victims and stuff.
You said he's ER doctor?
Well, so he was a resident at an ER. He didn't ultimately make that his career. He decided to make movies instead.
I don't blame him. Why don't we call him Dr. George Miller then? He's still a doctor. I guess you have to keep up your licensing.
I mean, maybe that's a him thing. If he had branded himself, you always have to call me Dr. George Miller.
Yeah, that does give you a certain feeling. And Dr. George Miller, that's my brother. They have the same name because they're twins.
That's right. So there was this interview in the AP by Jake Coyle this week, because his new movie is coming out. So there was this interview with him, and I'll read some from it.
Okay.
Quote, Miller was briefly a doctor before finding filmmaking, and his twin brother, whom he attended university with, remained one. As a resident of St. Vincent's Hospital in Sydney, Miller saw people in birth and death in moments of, he says, extremis. Extremis, a Latin word that literally translates as at the point of death, would be a fairly apt way to describe the post-apocalypse wasteland of Mad Max. It could apply to, all of the characters or to the Earth itself. The more you think about it, the more Miller's desert dystopia begins looking like a fantastical ER. The human blood bags of Mad Max Fury Road, Furiosa's prosthetic arm, Immortan Joe's respirator mask. This is a quote from Miller. I don't think I'd still be making films if I didn't have that part of myself, Miller said of his medical background in a recent interview. You're looking at a human being from every point of view, as organs, as individuals, sometimes looking through a microscope and seeing their cells, or an autopsy, psychologically. In every way, you're looking at the human being. That's what you do as a storyteller. End quote.
I'm exhausted just thinking about it. Yeah, that's the issue I have with just knowing I was never made for the medical profession or just understanding a body as a thing that lives and dies is extremely disturbing to me.
It is. Yeah. It's something that you
how fragile
don't want to
is.
think about. And the filmmaker's like, no, I'm going to make you think about it. Like, no, I don't want to.
I don't want to, please.
So he began producing short films in the early 1970s alongside his friend and producing partner Byron Kennedy. They formed the production company Kennedy & Miller, which continues to make all of his movies. And in 1979, they self-financed their first feature film, Mad Max. Starring in Mad Max as Max Rockatansky was the American-born but Australian-raised Mel Gibson, who was coming out of drama school in Sydney. We talked on our Signs episode, see our episode from October about M. Night Shyamalan Signs, about that Mel Gibson is a piece of shit. We go into that there. So just, we're aware he sucks as a person.
Yes.
And he's a very captivating screen presence, and everybody, it's complicated how you reconcile that you enjoy somebody's work, but you don't like what they are and are about as a person. But he's pretty great in these movies. But weirdly, I don't think he's
not really the movie.
He's always just, an ingredient in the soup.
An ingredient. Yep.
And you could take him out, as they're doing with this next movie, and it's okay. Or you can recast him with Tom Hardy, and it's okay.
Yep.
And
I can count his lines on two hands.
I think it's 16 lines in this movie.
Yeah.
He says so little, but acting isn't just speaking.
Well, of course.
It's presence. But I don't want to make that seem like I don't think he's great. I think he's so good in this movie. It's just, I would not say that these movies are great. Reason number one, because of Mel Gibson. I would never say that.
The world, hands down, there's not one character in this entire movie that pulls along the movie or is responsible for why it's good. It is the sum of its parts.
Mm-hmm. There is an apocryphal story that Mel Gibson showed up for the audition, bruised and beaten up from a bar fight the night before. And then they saw him and they're like, oh, that's Max. But George Miller shot that down. He said that didn't happen. In the commentary track on The Road Warrior, George Miller and his DP, Dean Semler, they're talking about Mel. I don't know when this was recorded. I think it probably was recorded before his problems started. And they say he hasn't changed. He's a larrikin. A larrikin, yes. It's like, larrikin, what is that? It just means he's
like a lark?
He's a troublemaker.
Oh.
The Australian lingo, that's another reason these movies are so great. You get to learn words like sproggo, which means a child.
I just thought these were like Mad Max words.
That's the thing. Yeah.
I don't know.
And I'm still not sure if the characters are calling gasoline guzzling, because that's what they say in this weird future.
Yeah.
Or they're saying gasoline, but they're pronouncing it guzzling, because the subtitles say gasoline.
But you can't rely on subtitles. Yeah, no, it does. And the way that little meme changes two words to what a substance becomes because of a certain situation, it's just very believable that that slight little change would be meaningful and true. It just makes it all seem more real, the world. Language changes.
Mm-hmm. Which is what's so
People
good.
People become, what did you say? Spazaroos. What are they? What are the kids? Sprogos. Sprogos. So
which I think
kangaroos.
I think progeny is why that. Apparently, this is a British word too. But I thought for a long time, because they only call Max's kid in the first movie Sproggo. I was like, well, I guess that's his name.
Oh, he has a kid. That all happens. That's real. That's not just in his head.
His wife and kid get killed in the first.
I know that happens, but I didn't know that the first one started. But I didn't know that's what happens in the first one. I just thought maybe that's backstory for both.
Yeah, no,
I don't want to see the first one then.
Yeah, I didn't want you to, because it is very upsetting. That happens at the end of the movie, and then that sets him off, and he becomes mad. But they say Sproggo, and that's an odd name, but no, it's just a nickname. It's like calling your kid baby or buddy or whatever. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Mad Max was a huge international hit everywhere except America.
What? Because we're the tough guys. We're the James Dean. You're not James Dean. We James Dean.
That's right.
Is it?
I don't know. But
I was really excited. I just thought maybe they're copying our thing. We do cars.
I don't know. Well, The Road Warrior was the big hit, but I don't think any individual was like, I'm not seeing that. We make Westerns, not them.
Well, then what are you talking about? You said it wasn't big and it is?
Mad Max 1 was not a big hit. Mad Max 2 was a hit.
I call all of them Mad Max. So.
Yes.
Okay.
When it was released in 1980 in America, it was released with a completely dubbed over soundtrack. It's American voices you hear.
What? They're speaking English?
Yeah, but they say, hey, instead of oi. I've never seen that version. You can see clips of it on YouTube.
That sounds
so
horrible.
Weird. Yeah. And including Mel Gibson dubbed over by an American actor. And this was the only version available in America until 2000. Okay, Mad Max 2. After the success of Mad Max 1, George Miller received offers from Hollywood to make an American film, but he declined. Ultimately decided to pursue a Mad Max sequel. In 1982, he told Michael Spector of the New York Times, quote, "Making Mad Max was a very unhappy experience for me. I had absolutely no control over the final product. It was just grabbed out of my hands. But to my surprise, it succeeded everywhere but in the United States and Canada. There was strong pressure to make a sequel, and I felt we could do a better job with a second movie." End quote. You get the feeling that Mad Max 2 is like, I have the resources and I'm smarter and better now. I want another crack at this.
I can't say.
Yeah.
I didn't see the first one.
But Mad Max is so different too. But you feel like maybe if he'd had the budget and the resources, then they would have gone totally into the apocalypse in that movie. Anyway,
they would have made it like a 4-hour like mega movie.
No. Because Mad Max 1 is set in a recognizable world. That maybe they just did that because they couldn't afford to make an apocalypse.
Right.
And then in this movie, it is the apocalypse with no explanation. Like, there's no real explanation that society is totally collapsed.
I also did not get the sense that they were that close to having a recognizable world until who's the sidekick guy, the goofy guy?
Gyro?
Until he mentions, I guess they'll never. Yeah, I miss this or that.
Perfume.
It's like, right. It's like, okay.
Lingerie.
Right. So you were old enough to be a person who was alongside lingerie. Okay. So this isn't even your childhood. This is that recent. But if I'd seen the first one, I would have understood that.
But it's not like it tells you this is this many years later.
Yeah.
But that's also why I like these movies, because it doesn't care. When movies are so obsessed with continuity and backstory and lore now, this was like, just go with it.
This movie is literally a desert and an oil refinery. So like the budget in this movie is just the action and the vehicles and how much damage they did to their inventory, right? I mean, everything else looks cheap. Doesn't look cheap, but it's sparse. There's not a whole lot of stuff.
Okay. So
I'm saying you just saying he didn't have the budget in the first one. I'm saying that it doesn't look like it doesn't look like a very expensive wasteland. I mean, when you take Fury Road and how much they had to build to show you all those set pieces that they had in the water stuff, and we're here literally they're just people occupying like an abandoned oil. You can tell that's a refinery, and then it's just desert.
Okay, but there's a 25-minute car chase with a big giant truck.
And that's exactly what I said, is that all the money was spent on the vehicles and the destruction of those vehicles. That's all. Well, I'm saying you can do those vehicle destruction things in a city.
You could, yes.
Okay, so
but they wouldn't be dressed like that.
Okay, right, you're right. The costuming. I still don't get the practicalness of him having one sleeve off. That used to be like a fashion thing, I don't know, in my 20s, where like to have the one long sleeve and then nothing over here. It's uncomfortable as fuck. You could never get warm or cold. Or sometimes I'll wear something with the back's gone, and it's like, I really need a back on this outfit. It
does look cool though.
It's even tailored to look like that. Like, it didn't get ripped off. It's just like, no, I just like one gun out and pew pew.
So we have to talk about this, Lacey.
Please, how God, important Jesus,
this movie is to the world of professional wrestling.
Is it now?
So several connections. The biggest being the legendary tag team, the Road Warriors, who are literally just dressed like Wes from Mad Max 2, the Road Warrior. And their tag team name was the Road Warriors. So when they went to WWF, Hawk and Animal were renamed Road Warrior Hawk and Road Warrior Animal with the spikes and the football pads. And then in the 1980s in Memphis, there was a heel character called Lord Humongous who wore the hockey mask just like the character from the movie. This is a character that multiple different wrestlers would play. And then the other connection is the phrase "the Ayatollah of rock and rolla," which wrestler Chris Jericho would often use, also comes from this movie.
Okay, great.
We had to mention.
I mean, I'm so glad. This is why I said big hair whenever I did my prediction of the movie. This is what I was thinking of, is Tina Turner and big hair.
Yes, in Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome.
It will never stop driving me crazy what men envision women would wear in an apocalyptic situation. Why would chainmail titties be the right move when you're trying to protect yourself as a woman? Well, at least she's got a tiny bow and arrow. She's in complete metal and chain around her tits. That would chafe. It would fall down.
I don't know. Practicality's out the window. We can't understand the psychology of these people. They're maniacs.
I can understand that a man decided to make these costumes. It's that there's no protection on the women. All the protective things are on the man. It is annoying.
George Miller's producing partner, Byron Kennedy, died in a helicopter crash in 1983. This wrecked George Miller. When he was making Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, he had to hire a co-director. They made Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. He said to process his grief. It was a big hit, but reviews were weaker than the first two films. This is the one that people say isn't good. I like it a lot. My opinion is, like everybody, it's kind of two movies. You have the Tina Turner first half, and then Mad Max goes off on his own and finds a gang of kids right out of Steven Spielberg's Hook and becomes their leader.
Are they Aboriginal?
No.
They're just all feral.
Yes, but they're acting like Rufio and everybody else. And it becomes a little too cutesy.
Got it.
I think they're like, we love the feral kid in the first movie, so let's have 20 feral kids.
Right.
This is the most that kind of story has ever worked for me, of a Lost Boys sort of thing, because I just generally hate that.
Yeah. You hate children.
That I like it in Beyond Thunderdome, but I can see why this people poster think art. It's annoying.
Her hair going into the sunrise like that is beautiful.
Yeah, she's so good, anti-entity in that movie.
Why didn't she do more acting?
I don't know. I think she was only in 2 movies.
Maybe she just didn't like it.
Yeah, I'm sure it was her. I mean, she was a superstar.
She's super fucking, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. After Mad Max, George Miller finally went over to Hollywood to make a movie, The Witches of Eastwick, and it was a big problem for him because suddenly he didn't have control in the studio. Was all over his ass. Like George Lucas, control is a big thing for him. And then he made Lorenzo's Oil, which was Witches of Eastwick was a pretty big hit. Lorenzo's Oil was not. It was supposed to be sort of an Oscar player, but it was not. Then he went into kids movies. He wrote and produced Babe, which was a giant hit. And then he took over as director for the sequel, Babe, Pig in the City. And I made a little video about that. I think it's George Miller's most Mad Max movie. It is fucking insane. If you haven't seen Babe, Pig in the City, it is like a Mad Max movie with pigs. And then he directed
hate Happy Feet.
Happy Feet, which I have not
piece of shit
seen all the way through.
Because it's not good.
Yeah, that's the one where
it is unsettling.
So when a live action director is credited as the director of an animated film, I always wonder, what does that mean? Because like, I feel like you need to be an actual animator to direct an animated movie. What it means is you're the boss of the people who do the animation.
He took a lot of vacations then.
And
it's just a movie that relies entirely on pop songs that already exist. And it's like, that's supposed to just, and it kind of works. But like a good example of a good movie that relies on pop songs is Sing. That's an animated movie that has a lot of songs that already exist, but it's a real movie with a real story. Happy Feet is about fucking nothing.
Isn't it about a penguin who loses his egg or something?
Sure. It's Horton Hears a Fucking Who. I don't know. It's just, who cares?
I don't think I've ever seen it all the way through. I'm probably going to watch it and the sequel this week so I can do a George Miller rankings.
Is the sequel Happy Foot, ironically?
That'd be good.
That would be good.
Yeah. Mad Max Fury Road, a giant hit, super acclaimed. He was nominated for an Oscar for Best Director. 2 years ago, he made 3,000 Years of Longing, a great movie about Tilda Swinton as a lady who finds a genie played by Idris Elba. And they just talk in a hotel room and he tells her the stories of his life of going through orgies throughout time.
Okay.
Very cool movie. And then Furiosa this week. That is the history of Mad Max.
Thank you.
And if you want to see our full discussion of Mad Max 2: The Road Warrior, just check out our full episode.
Which was probably posted on the same date that this one was. Yeah, we are a podcast in which we discuss the entire movie, but this is just the history segment. Please enjoy. Please. And fucking subscribe. We're a treat. I think I went that whole thing without cursing, so almost okay for children.